Welcome to Rune Soup, a weekly podcast about magic, culture, and the paranormal. My name is Gordon, and I shall be your host. This week, we have something of a surprise double talking show. What happened was, I booked the lovely Sarah Lawless to come back on, and when I called in, the also lovely Juniper Jeni happened to be visiting. Given the topic is plant allies, I took the opportunity to impose on two experts simultaneously. You're welcome. But before we begin, I should mention the audio quality isn't the best. It's clearly still warm in Canada, and I didn't hear the air conditioner quite as loudly as the Skype recorder did. I've done my best to clean it up, but please accept my apologies and persevere. It's a fantastic discussion, which we shall jump right on into. Juniper, welcome to the show. Sarah, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you.
Well, this is a bit of fun. You guys are having a sleepover up there at the Equinox?
We're neighbors.
Oh, neighbors, really? Okay, so no sleepovers.
No sleepover. We live about 20 minutes apart.
Ah, that's fun. Nice one, nice one. So, how was your Equinox?
Mine was full of small children screaming.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to go swimming in a beautiful lake with like rolling hillside in the wilderness. So it's all good.
And yourself?
My husband and I were recovering from Cornucopia Gathering, which my husband ran this year. It's one of the events at the Ravensnow Campground, and it's the traditional pagan Thanksgiving, burn the corn king kind of a thing. So we had done that the weekend before, and we're exhausted, so we laid in bed and did nothing on the actual equinox.
Well, very good. So the gathering was good this year?
Yes, it was. We had 107 adults attend, which was pretty nice size.
It's not shabby.
Yeah,
it's not shabby. Is that a record or is that about average?
That's a little bit more than usual for that particular event.
Nice one, nice one. So, you guys both are big-time herb nerds, which is one of the things I would like to talk about today. So, question the first. We'll start with Juniper. Tell us about your first, shall we say, ally-assisted or plant ally-assisted journey.
I was living in just outside Edmonton, Alberta, actually, and I had gotten myself a little field guide and was learning all the different plants that was around my property. And I decided to start with something very simple, so it was actually Labrador tea.
Oh, yes.
And, it was something I could make tea of and drink and not poison myself. And it was abundant and easily identifiable. So I was intelligent and started small. And I actually still have a little jar with the desiccated leaves of the first time I ever gathered it.
A little creepy dead memento.
Yeah. A little creepy dead memento. I love it. I actually want to come back to that because I think you've hit on something quite good there. But we'll try and keep the questions leveling up. So, Sarah, same question. Tell us about your first.
Your question was posed like you were asking me what drugs I've taken.
We can do drugs as well. That's realistically that's where it was going to go. But Juniper brought up a really interesting point, which I will now quickly insert in between question 1 and 2. But yeah, tell us about like a first, because I mean you're known for flying ointments and that kind of stuff. So when was the first kind of... Well, tell us about your experience that made you think there's something to this.
My experience actually was not drugs. My first, this shit is real experience was a Devil's Club in the Pacific Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to the local natives, it's considered a very powerful and magical plant. It's considered like a medicine man and a sorcerer in its own right. So I went into the woods and I sweet talked the hell out of a plant and I dug it up and I collected the root bark because that's the only part that you're really supposed to use, and I made myself a tea, and it smells kind of like ginger and ginseng had a weird baby, a tasty baby, and I drank it because the shamans used to drink it. I was trying to figure out why they drank it. Some people think it's an entheogen. It's not. It makes you vomit and poop yourself if you drink too much. So don't.
All right.
In small quantities, it's very pleasant. It's good for digestion. It's used to treat blood sugar and diabetes, hypoglycemia, cholesterol, all kinds of various afflictions. Magically, I found that it was definitely a powerful healer, but it was also like an enhancer for magic. So if you were doing a ritual or a ceremony or a spell, I feel like that plant would help you do it more powerfully.
And what was it? And this is kind of coming back because of you both used some non-entheogenic teas as initial examples. What was it that made you think, okay, I'm going to go out into the woods? Like, what talk us through the decision making that says, okay, in Juniper's case, I'm going to get this book, I'm going to go out and harvest this plant and make a tea, and same thing for you, because it is a minority behavior in the 20th, 21st century. And it's quite bold because, as Juniper mentioned, if you fuck it up, you can die.
Yeah. You mean the reasoning for why?
Yeah. Let's talk about the beginning, because I want to get towards the end with questions about how people who are interested in this stuff and how they can do it depending on whereabouts they live and that kind of thing. So there has to be decision making, unless you grew up. I know Sarah did a bit. I know Sarah grew up with access to the natural landscape and plants in a very different, or in a really cool way. But there is still that extra step, which is like, I'm going to go out into the woods and do something which humans used to do, but we don't do as often anymore.
Yeah. At the time, I was going to college, and I was obsessively reading university theses on native shamanism and traditions and their local plants. And so I was reading a lot about animism and the idea that plants were living beings that were very intelligent. They were teachers. They were kind of like how other pagans were treating gods. And I decided that I wanted to experience that, to figure it out. To like, okay, if these plants are the level of gods for these peoples, then maybe I need to try this. Maybe there's something to this. Because I'd never really connected a lot with deities. So I wanted to see what the plants had to say, I guess. And it was a lot.
Yeah. Juniper?
Well, I did it because that's what witches do. It's really as simple as that. I suppose I was always more drawn to that archetype of the witch as the herbalist and the person who knows what the plants are around their farm or around the cottage or the village or whatever. But that's what witches do. And I don't think that there's any excuse to stick to store-bought all of the time. It's not that hard to learn what one thing that grows in your area does and give it a try.
Yeah, like go get your hands dirty.
Yeah, go do stuff.
No, absolutely. Well, that necessarily kind of pulls along on another question, which is, well, it's two actually, and the first one's to Juniper. So, what even is hedge witchery in that sense? So,
there's a whole article she wrote on.
I know.
It's been published in a book.
Some people think I wrote it, but she did.
Yeah,
she wrote it.
Yeah.
Well, and you say that, but this is looking very suspect. We arranged a call, and then all of a sudden, Juniper's there. If we weren't doing video, I'm like, are they even the same person? I don't even know.
I've been accused of being her, and she's been accused of being me.
And people accuse us of plagiarizing each other. Hilarious.
I arrived at her house today with coffee cake.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, that's so. Juniper, you allegedly wrote this article on hedge witchery. So one of you may answer it. Whoever wrote it, what even is it?
The hedge is a symbol for thresholds, boundaries, the veil, the borderlands between the wild and the countryside and things like that. Because for many, many years, us white folks build hedges instead of fences, or to support our fences. So it's a very obvious metaphor for that which is between the borderlands between ordinary reality and non-ordinary reality. And so it got taken up in the 90s mostly by sort of solitary non-Wiccans who were more interested in shamanic work and animism, and kind of took it up from there. It comes from concepts like the hedge knights and the hedge priests and hedge vicars.
What is
of
the
England.
German word?
Hegtessa?
Yeah, that's where most of the people are getting it
Which
from.
is actually a mistranslation of a mistranslation of a mistranslation of the Havamal, which is awesome, and I love that.
I didn't know that. That's really cool. So what's a hedge vicar then? If people were inspired by that idea, like what is it about the hedge in kind of Northwest European um,
I think it's the
rural
idea
belief?
of the shamanic part of witchcraft, the otherworldly journeying, the interactions with spirits, talking to animals and plants as if you talk to a human. It's that idea of there's a little bit more to the witchcraft than just, the robes and the candles and the incense.
Yeah, it's climbing into the ditches and the hedgerows instead of doing everything over the hearth or at a fancy altar.
It's like getting outside, getting dirty, actually interacting with nature.
And it's about non-initiatory witchcraft, because the hedge vicars and the hedge priests were people who were not necessarily ordained by the church, but who were going out and performing weddings and funerals and things like that, and would sleep in the hedgerows and then dress up nice and roll into town and be like, "Hi, I'm a priest, but give me money." And it does stem from that. It's a non-initiatory. It's not a tradition. It's a style of doing witchcraft. It's not something that you have to kiss a high priestess's ass for a year and a half to do.
Nothing to do with lineage. I think it appealed greatly to people, and definitely took off in the traditional witchcraft community, especially.
And with our generation as well.
With our generation, really went crazy with the hedge witchery.
Yeah.
And you kind of say which is correct, I suppose, that the term rose to kind of common contemporary use in around the 90s. Was that based on, as we just said, like mistranslations of mistranslations in German and this vaguely British folklorish idea of a hedge vicar, or at the beginning, was it actually based in an understanding of the biology of a hedge, or did that come later? Because as a permaculture designer, there are a lot of amazing things about hedges that are accidentally really, really apt. So was that there to begin with?
I think the original hedge witches in the 90s had no knowledge about hedges and permaculture, I'm going to be honest.
And I would like to say that I was one of the first people to actually start writing about how you build hedgerows and what grows in it and why it makes good symbolism. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it's you walked into that one, Juniper. Why?
It's what witches do. We try to start off all like, ooh, the magic and the power, and look at how strange and esoteric it is. And then there's always that other witch that's like, don't be stupid. The magic is in the ordinary, boring, mundane thing over here.
Yeah. So tell us about how hedges are accidentally a really good sort of model for this term.
Well, there's lots of things. For example, the older a hedge is, the more different species it has growing in it. And that's very true for witches, too. The longer you've been practicing, the wider your skill set, and maybe even the more interesting plants you have growing in your own garden.
And the older the hedges, the more varied species of animals and insects are going to frequent it. So I guess like a witch, the analogy again would be you'd have more familiar spirits that you're working with.
For me, my first thoughts are in permaculture, you have the edge effect. So you have greater amounts of biodiversity where you have more interactions. So particularly in, say, Wiltshire or somewhere, you have fields of grass, which are have low biodiversity, but they are actually surrounded by hedges, which can be centuries old and are a polyculture and perennial and filled with different bugs and plants that we've just said. But also there is something about being near the edge that improves the yield of whatever is growing in it. So in those fields, you actually get a higher wheat yield around the edge. So it's to use, I guess this episode will come out possibly in October, if not close enough. The hedge as a between the world symbol is accidentally really, really apt because it is in between two worlds, and it's there that you get the diversity and connections and so on. And I find it's one of those things that's accidentally built itself.
Yeah, it's always reminded me of like the Devil's Acre too. The old like Scottish English tradition where you leave a part fallow for the fairies, where you kind of like you leave the hedge alone and it becomes wild again. So that's why the soil is better, because it's got that biodiversity. It's great soil. And it's got the windbreak, so everything that grows near it is protected. So you got the still air. I don't know. They're very magical, and we still have them here. This is where we live in Ontario is epic farmland, and for centuries now. So we have hedges that who knows how old they are in some of the farms, which is really
Not quite so many in Australia. There is, funny enough, talking about Tasmania, there's a few down there. Most of them get ripped up because they planted blackberry, and blackberry quite likes Tasmania a bit too much.
Blackberry likes everywhere.
Yeah. So, I mean, we spoke about almost non-entheogenic, well, definitely non-entheogenic plant journeys before the hedge thing. Let's talk about the first, it doesn't even have to be an entheogen, just like the first psychedelic or substantially altering plant experience.
It fits because this type of witchcraft is usually heavily focused on entheogens or trance work at the very least.
We're more likely to be poisoners than healers.
Yeah.
They'll come to me for a bellyache, come to me because, you're having trouble getting into a trance state.
Or have epic depression or anxiety.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Just lay it all on. So, I mean, your first experience.
I think it was marijuana.
Yeah.
I've hallucinated on marijuana one time, which is bizarre because you're not really supposed to hallucinate on marijuana. So it makes me question if it was the marijuana or if it was the blackberry pancakes I had earlier that day. Maybe had fermented a little. I just started to see things that seemed like reality, but then it took me a while to recognize that it wasn't reality. Especially when you start commenting to other people around you, like, why is everyone a robot? Did you know that they're robots? And everyone goes, no, they're not. No one's a robot. What's wrong with you? That kind of thing. That wasn't a very magical experience. My first very magical experience on an entheogen was probably Mandrake, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. It's one of my favorite herbs to work with out of the nightshades that I use, and mostly because it's incredibly pleasant. So not only is it a pleasant herb that is actually willing to work with people, so it's not trying to hurt you, but you are having a positive experience during your trance. So you're not like freaking the hell out, like you've smoked Datura or something. With Mandrake, if you're drinking a wine or you're using an ointment, you feel very light and happy and warm and fuzzy and tingly and floaty and silly and giddy. And it's also a little aphrodisiac too. And it definitely shifts reality very subtly so that you really can't necessarily tell the difference between reality and non-reality anymore, to the point where is there even a difference?
And did someone say, hey, you should try this? Or was it like the first tea you made? So did you grow some Mandrake and soak it in wine, or what did you do?
I got some from this really cool shop that doesn't exist anymore. And I turned it into an ointment. And I dug up a bunch of rituals from the Argonautica, which I know is fiction, but it's ancient fiction. So I figured there's little nuggets of truth in there. And I took Medea's rituals for the Mandrake root for harvesting it. So instead, I wasn't harvesting it, obviously, but I did the blessing from the little ritual over the Mandrake root that I had. And then I did a ritual where you're supposed to bathe in the water of 7 flowing streams. That was hard. But at the time I was living on a mountain that was an aquifer, naturally, so it had a million little fingers of streams running down it. So I just did a big long hike, and I walked from one to another. But I collected the water, so I didn't have to actually bathe in each one. I collected the water and brought it home, and then I bathed in it at the appropriate time. It was like a little cheat. And then I did a little incantation over my finished little ointment that is supposed to make it potent. And then I rubbed it on with my apprentice at the time, and we sat in my garden surrounded by my nightshades, and just to see what we would feel, and we talked to the Mandrake, and it was very bizarre. It shifts reality, and it gives you power. I can't really describe it. If you consecrate it in such a way, I very much felt like it gave you very potent magical powers that would freak you out a little bit. Like, I was sitting in my garden thinking how dry all my plants were. They were so dry and they were so thirsty. I could just hear them all saying how thirsty they were. And it was a very clear day. There weren't any clouds. And then suddenly clouds rolled in and it started to rain. And I was like, Was it the Mandrake and me thinking that I need to water my plants that made it rain? Or did it just happen to rain at that moment? I was very like, me and my apprentice were like, let's go back inside. Okay.
At any stage before you administered it, did you idly wonder if you were going to die?
Oh, definitely not.
No? Because it does come with, a reputation, mostly wrongly, of death.
Mandrake doesn't really have any documented fatalities that I could find.
But it does have that reputation of you might...
It has a bit of a reputation, mostly because of people in the Renaissance and late Middle Ages who were selling things that were not mandrake root as mandrake root, i.e. belladonna.
Yeah. All right, so we'll come back to that because that's really interesting. Juniper, same question. Your first, I don't want to say DIY entheogen experience, but I just did. What's your version of what Sarah just went through?
Well, the story that I normally tell is about Datura, but it's a story I know I've told on multiple other podcasts before, and I'm kind of getting tired of telling that one.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, this is horribly noisy.
Squeaky bad.
Okay, cut that.
Very good.
We'll think we're canoodling.
So, anyways, I don't tell the Datura story anymore. Just because I've overtold it now, and I notice that if I'm telling it to a group of people, they already know it, and they're interjecting, which is weird.
Whole new audience, though, possibly.
Yeah, possibly, or there might be people listening who want to finish the sentence. You never know. But anyway, carry on.
So I'll tell you a different story, and it was accidental. It was I was 15, 16, with a group of my little punk rock friends, and we all decided to take magic mushrooms. Just your good old-fashioned magic mushrooms chilling in Buddy's backyard. And I was just a couple of years in of being a brand new baby witch, and I was in that really hardcore phase of reading everything I could and doing every ritual in every book that I could find and having to collect all of the things. It would take an hour to set up altar space because it had to be just right. And I was in that.
Do you remember those days?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to call the specific archangel.
Yeah. Try to pronounce the name and do it wrong every time. And so
I'm still at that phase. I'm still at the wrong pronunciation phase.
Oh, God. I don't think I've outgrown the mispronunciation.
Yeah. Anyway, carry on.
So myself and a bunch of my little punk rocker friends were tripping balls on mushrooms in the backyard of Dana's mom's house. And all of a sudden, everything that I was tripping out on, you see the shapes in the clouds and the shapes in the wood grain on the fence and the shapes in the trees, all became goddesses. Everywhere I looked, it was all goddess, 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 and they're all turning to look at me, and I'm getting weirded out. So I went into the house and went into the bathroom, and there was goddesses in the wallpaper. So I left there and went into the bedroom, and there were goddesses on the wallpaper and on the bed sheets and just everywhere. And I'm going I don't know what you want. And so I rounded up all of my little punk rock friends and I forced them all to do this crappy half-remembered goddess chant, and we had to take our Cheetos and our cheesies and leave them at the base of a tree to appease the goddess because she wouldn't leave me alone.
But cheesies would work.
It's what we had. I was 16.
Okay.
And I was very convinced that the goddess had something very important to tell me, and I didn't know what it was, and I spent the whole night partly freaking out, partly trying to hide from her, and partly trying to figure out how to appease her. And I wound up forcing myself to learn divination after that point, because I was I do not ever want to receive a message and not be able to ask for clarification again.
Smart.
Yeah.
Maybe that was the message. Maybe it was you need to learn divination now.
There you go, right?
Yeah. Or maybe she's still angry because, as Sarah did point out, some low-quality artificial snacks don't make,
What about you, Gordon?
My first... in a magical context?
Magical or entheogenic?
Just in general?
Yeah.
I've hallucinated of marijuana as well, initially as a 15-year-old. And then again, deliberately a couple of years ago when I was working out how to do, in that kind of lazy sense, a sort of if you look at some of the shape of, or some of the antecedents of the devil going back, say, 5,000 years, it is at least partially something to do with a Eurasian god of the animals kind of thing, right? Partially, and everyone who's listened to the courses will know that I don't mean that in the kind of early 20th century Wiccan sense, but it has some, iconographic similarity. So I was thinking, like, well, is there a is there like a is there essentially a mantra where I can build a fire, get really high, and chant a mantra, and have it as what I called in the book, a Sabbat in the box. And so, Shiva Pashupati, Lord of the Animals, doesn't really have mantras, so I kind of built one with my zero knowledge of Sanskrit, and that worked unbelievably well if you would like to quote unquote hallucinate a sort of solo Sabbat devil. And I recommend that to people if they're going camping now and they have weed and a fire. About 15, 20 minutes, once you're quite high, don't just start straight away, but as you're coming up on it, 15, 20 minutes of a Pashupati mantra in the early evening around a fire, and you have yourself a lonely girl Sabbat for one.
Excellent. I would recommend Eco Azarak next time.
There you go. As for my favorite one, kind of like Juniper, but I have earlier ones, but one of my favorite ones is when we went to Amsterdam for my birthday, and it was a long-running Baphomet rite where I kind of did a 10-day green juice fast and went to the Hellfire Caves and had them to myself to kind of do this Baphomet thing. And then the next day went to Amsterdam, and we just bought truffles in the red light district like normal tourists. But we'd had an Airbnb house, and I spent about 20 hours with these rituals that I'd put together that were kind of like a Gnostic John the Baptist thing. I was still trying to figure out the headlessness that showed up in starships. That was unbelievable. And I got some interesting tech out of it, which is actually my next question. As a result of these experiences, Juniper, you just mentioned that one of the things you got from that 16-year-old recreational mushroom experience was, in a way, a lesson. Like you said, okay, I need to step up my divination game. Is there any way we can universalize these experiences? Because I got some interesting journeying tech from the mushroom experience to do with shaping of a vine tunnel as a way for me to kind of move into the imaginal realm, which I've tried to describe to people and get them to use, and it's never really worked. It works a fucking treat for me. So can we universalize, or are there any universal components to entheogenic interaction?
Yes and no. I mean, something like your vine tunnel. A lot of people do utilize some sort of tunnel symbolism.
I have a totally different visualization than you. Like I do like a stone archway with like a yew tree that has stairs going down to the ocean.
But even if you do use a tunnel or a stone archway, your tunnel or your stone archway is going to be completely different, with different symbolism and different things growing and different light quality. And
the shamanic community usually just tells people, like, go to your doorway or here's a door. They don't give you descriptors. So if you're going to do a universal one, you'd have to like leave it really bare, I think.
And then you're practicing like white bread shamanism.
What is it? Core shamanism.
Mm-hmm.
That's the term.
And no, if you're using entheogens to have visions or receive messages, it should be specific, and it's going to be something very individual to you.
Specificity. That being said, I have hosted large rituals with maybe 50 people or more with entheogens, and everyone was able to get there because you leave them to do it on their own. So my ritual format for that, which has worked multiple times, was the opposite of every Wiccan ritual I've ever been to. So socialize first. Get people happy and drunk first. Mm-hmm. So feed the people, give them a bunch of drugs and alcohol, because it can take, a couple hours for flying ointments to hit some people. So get them nice and toasted early on. And then once they're getting toasty and the socializing is starting to not wear down, but like reach like that point where the voices are so loud you can't hear single voices anymore. Then you bring out the music. So I'd be like, hey drummers, come over here now to get the drummers going, and people can't talk anymore over the drums. Make sure they're really loud, and then you get people dancing and chanting. So they've socialized, they've already been fed, so they're not going to pass out. But fasting is good, but don't do that on the first run. So they're socialized, they're fed, they've had alcohol, they've had either marijuana or a flying ointment, or they've smoked something, whatever it is you're going to do that doesn't make you fall over asleep. You bring in the drumming and dancing and chanting, and you have a goal. So everyone should have a goal in mind that's attending. So my goal, like for the events I've done, was we're just invoking like the horned god or some vision of the devil, the witch's devil kind of thing, because it's a Sabbat. And then calling him, and then have something you actually want to ask of him, because you don't just call a god and then be like, yo, what's up?
Yep.
Here's some Cheetos, bye.
Yeah.
I love it. I think cheesies is a great offering. We got to do that for like a trickster god. But yeah, so you want to have a purpose. So my purpose for a group that's not private is usually divination.
Mm-hmm.
So, because you don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty with a group of people that aren't a working coven. So we would do like either have an oracle. So we have like a high seat with an oracle or two, and they pull out cards, or they just speak divinations to each individual person. So we'd have the drummers keep drumming so people don't wander off again. That's very important. Don't let people wander off during a quiet point.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'd have them line up and sing chants during the drumming so that they can't hear everybody's fortunes being told. So it's still very private. And just cycle through, and then we go back to the Sabbat, because the offering in thanks is the dancing and the drinking and the feasting. If anyone's read Aradia, that's the offering, is the party. The party is the offering to the god. So you start with the party and you end with the party. And at that point in the night, after the divination, everyone's partying again for the second time with the drumming and the dancing and the chanting. Everyone started to have experiences. Some people were like their brains would spin and they'd fly out of their bodies and have visions. Or one girl got trapped in the bathroom stall. She felt like she was paralyzed, and she kept like seeing all these visions and spirits speaking to her, and she couldn't leave the bathroom until they were finished. So I can't believe she shared that. I would have been a little embarrassed.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It is kind of cool.
A lot of other people reported that after they fell asleep that night, they had insane vivid dreams and astral travels in their sleep. So then in the morning, then we all, because this was like campover events, we would all report back and talk about our experiences. I found it to be very effective. So I like to shorthand it again. So let people socialize, because they got to get it out of the way. They're going to talk or make mischief during a ritual if you don't let them. Socialize, drink, do your entheogens before you start the ritual, a good amount of time, 1 to 2 hours before, and then involve music and chanting and dancing in some form.
And give people space to have their own experiences.
Yes, give people space to have their own experiences. You're just like, a good ritualist is just a guide. You're not doing the visualization where every little detail is thought out for you. You're just the guide. You're just giving them the tools to get there on their own.
You're setting the stage.
Yeah, setting the stage, giving them a direction. And I find that format has worked better than any other ritual format that I've tried, specifically for a witch's Sabbat.
Mm-hmm.
I wish more people would implement it. I think I need to write it up and just send it out to the world and see how people, if they have the same success with it.
And we utilize a similar format at the Witches' Sabbath at Ravensnull in May. The first time Sarah came up, she was like, you guys kind of do things the way I kind of do things. We're like, high five!
Fist bump.
Yeah.
So it's because these...
Socialize, they have like a bit of a party, and then late at night is the ritual. After,
Well, the thing, I mean, with these molecules especially, it's one of the reasons why psilocybin's my favorite. It takes a couple of, let's just say 2 hours to come up, and then you have a couple of hours to do what you came there to do, whatever that happens to be, journeying, etc. And then it's actually a very pleasant subsequent 6 hours. So you kind of sandwich, your Sabbath is a party sandwich. Party, business, party. And I like that. I think that's that is a very worthwhile structure, especially if it's hands-off for people who want to do this in even small groups, even like 4 or 5 people. It's more or less the same. Sit around, give people space, come back. Don't expect if you're doing this kind of stuff, don't allocate 6 hours of the evening to lying down on a yoga mat with like an eye patch on, getting really into the visions. That 2 hours is enough. Like 2 hours is enough.
Shamanic conferences with workshops. I'm doing air quotes. Workshops like that, where it's like, come, this is a 4 to 5 hour workshop, and we're just gonna lie down and journey the whole time, but they don't tell you how to do anything.
That's just a nap. I mean, I would go to that. That sounds really nice,
Oh yeah,
as a nap.
People like, they do the conference after. We're like, how did it go for you? Everyone share your journey. And there'd always be that one honest guy that's like, you know what, nothing happened. I just had a really nice nap.
Yeah, good.
I had a guy that did that in one of my workshops, and I was like, no, that's cool.
Yeah.
I have done the 6 hour ritual. I mean, we did it for WS this year. But in that case, the entire ritual is the socializing beforehand, the business in between, the party after. Yeah. You're not warning people that it's going to take that long. Yeah, and you're just kind of letting it drag out and letting it have its highs and its lows and things like that.
And if you're going to turn that into an individual ritual for 1 or 2 people, that's going to be a little harder. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So my format for the individual ritual for 1 to 3 people is little socialization, and then have your alcohol, your drugs, your entheogen, whatever it is you're going to do. If you're really not into mind-altering substances, then you do whatever it is that gets you in trance. So everyone has their trigger. I'm doing air quotes again. Trigger, which could be anything from a chant to drumming to swaying and dancing to postures, that make you out of breath, to specific breathing techniques, that kind of thing. Whatever that part of it is, do that. And then do your intent in your ritual, supposedly while in between. And then finish, leave your offering, and have like an offering for yourself as well to ground. Have like a snack or a drink that's not alcohol or entheogenic. And then close your doors, send back all your deities, close everything up, safe. Everything should always end nice and safely. And then have a little come down party after, alone or with your friend or your buddy. Or, like watch some Netflix and, eat a snack or like share a bottle of wine or whatever after. It's going to be a quieter version, but it's still going to work as well.
And if you're looking, if you're a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people and you're looking to do that like hardcore witchcraft ritual where you really feel that you've put in the whole night and you've gone really hard, give yourself like a simple challenge that's going to take a while, like go for a hike.
Yeah. Keep it simple.
Choose your ritual space somewhere where you have to, you're taking the long way up, through the forest path and then back down again, because then you can build it into the atmosphere of the ritual and you feel like you've accomplished something.
It's like a Buddhist pilgrimage to like a temple.
It's like, we shall process with our flashlights through the woods at night. It's
to the 3-way crossroad on the hill.
Exactly. It gives
very Robert Cochrane.
It gives it that extra witchy, but it's achievable even if you guys were kind of smoking weed the whole walk up.
Yes.
Nice. So let's bring that down to what that might look like. For the premium members, we are coming towards the end of our Q3 course on journeying, and there are a couple of questions that I would like to table to do with, for people who've never had a plant-assisted journey before and are realistically going to do it on their own. Let's talk around some best practice and kind of like preferred beginner allies. You might want to take yourself off to the jungle for 2 weeks and do ayahuasca and do the full tour. That's fine. But if you're not, if you're actually going to be in an actual house that you live in and you're very interested in exploring this, which I think everyone who's serious about it should, let's talk around that kind of best practice.
I usually recommend mugwort and wormwood as good beginner.
The Artemisia family isn't going to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll get you high, but they're not going to hurt you, and it's not unpleasant. Both of them can give some people a headache. That's really as worse as it gets. My suggestion is also to do the plant first, not during ritual, just recreationally. Do it 1 to 4 times recreationally before you do it in a ritual. If it's not like a huge, like if it's not ayahuasca.
Yeah.
Don't do ayahuasca without
Just
the ritual.
go about your day sipping it. Yeah.
Don't do that. But if it's marijuana or wormwood or mugwort or
Netflix and chill with it one night first.
Yeah, just to see how you react. Even with my flying ointments, I tell people always do a test patch. Don't do the ritual the first time you use it because you don't know how you're going to react. You don't know how much you need to use to feel anything. So test it out first if possible. If it's something that like it's a big deal and you're probably not going to try it again, I'm going to say to some people, like, don't be scared of mushrooms. Don't be scared of psilocybin because it's one of the safest entheogens in the world. Science tells us, so science can't be wrong.
Never has been.
So it's okay to do mushrooms a few times recreationally. There is no witch law out there that's gonna like, woo, the witch police are gonna show up and be like, oh, you did drugs, without any meaning behind it. We're gonna get you now.
Funny.
God is start chasing you.
Yeah, that could happen. But so
It's
also
okay to
get
use
some
entheogens for pleasure.
and
Just
if as a backup, have some Cheetos. So if everything goes wrong, you have an offering. Yeah.
And if you're scared, have someone with you. Even if it's a mild entheogen, have a friend with you that's not going to get high. Just to keep an eye on you. Even like when you're really drunk, you do stupid things. So even if you're using alcohol as your transportation device, have a friend there that's not ridiculously drunk, that makes sure that you don't decide to go skinny dipping in a public place or dance on a table or something ridiculous.
Trip over your own feet and fall.
Yeah, something that you shouldn't do. A lot of entheogens can cause confusion, dizziness, erratic, crazy behavior like a drunkard. So
fine motor control.
Poor motor control, aphrodisiac effects that can result in hitting on people or
difficulty with the ability to give consent,
or that people should have boundaries in personal space. So keep these things in mind when you're dealing with anything mind altering. That it takes away all kinds of different boundaries, not just between our world and the other world.
And use a ritual that you're familiar with. If you're going in with an entheogen, that should not be the first time you've ever done that ritual. Always do the ritual a couple of times first, straight and sober, get comfortable with it, and then introduce the entheogen.
Yeah, and if you're working with a deity or specific spirit, again, maybe you should work with them first before you use a drug. Not just like, hey, I'm high, let's talk to this god that I've never spoken to before. Because they'll mess with you.
Remember that, as Sarah says, plants are witches too, so make sure that if you're using wormwood or something like that, that you're saying hello, that you're acknowledging the fact that you're working with a spirit.
Yeah, you're actually working
entity.
With the plant, not just using a plant as a device.
Well, so that is a couple of things there I want to look at historically. I think it's correct that there is a sort of Protestant, or correct observation, that there's a sort of Protestant work ethic approach to plant allies where every time you're going to do one of these things, it has to be the business. And I'm not sure if that's historically observed. But on that note, we've just got through kind of doing through up into the early modern period and then the 19th century from the history perspective on the course. And I would like to get your opinions on the historical evidence for what different plant allies might have been used as things like flying ointments. Because what we do have, speaking of the funsies, whenever the mentions we have of something like Mandrake or Datura in wine, one description, and it just sounds like a really pleasant evening, some woman drank wine infused with Mandrake, I believe it was, and got in the bath. And just had it like a really nice bath. It was sort of, the description of it was obviously very sexist and centuries old, which is her skin went blotchy. She had, delirium and dissociation from reality. And I'm like, that actually just sounds like a really good evening when the kids aren't around. It honestly, that's what I look into it. But that's closer to recreation. It's, do we have it's the most fascinating area to look at historically, because in the classical age you have people using these things for medicine, for recreation, and for religious work, for want of a better term. And then there's this weird gap, except the plants never went away. And then we're now, and we don't really. Is it an absence of evidence situation? What do you think's going on with things like Datura and Mandrake in European history?
I think it's just a gap where it wasn't used for a long time. So the nightshades, Datura, Mandrake, Henbane, Belladonna, they were used from our ancient past, like that I could find. I couldn't find when we weren't using them, really.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe up until the mid-1800s. And then suddenly we just stopped using them. Mostly because we didn't need them as soporifics anymore for surgery. So once we had modern medicine, we stopped using them. And then we stopped using them recreationally as well, which makes me curious. Because henbane especially was very recreational in most of Europe and the United Kingdom. It was, and everywhere in the world, honestly, that has henbane, everyone was doing it recreationally. In the Middle East, they still mix it with tobacco and smoke it. Morocco too, I believe. And in Scotland, they used to just chew the leaves straight up, or smoke it, or burn the seeds in a fire and inhale it. The Norse would have entire gardens of henbane that was for medicinal, recreational, and magical use. I don't think our ancestors differentiated, and I think that we put too much effort into, like, oh, well, I'm supposed to only use it for this. It's like, no.
Drugs are bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Drugs are good.
I think that we've just come into a culture where there is drugs and just say no and the war on
and
drugs.
We're scared of plants because of the shift in medicine. So now we're scared of herbal medicine and plants.
And then it gets wrapped up with drugs and people think of it like it's some sort of like meth or cocaine or something.
Yeah, meth and crack.
Yeah.
What was it? I was watching a horrible new sitcom called Disjointed where they were making a joke trying to compare a woman accuses a man of comparing marijuana to meth and crack. And he's like, no, because that's like comparing apples to meth and crack. It's not. One's innocent and two are really horrible. So I think that's where we're at right now as like a world culture. We have this idea that drugs are bad, okay? We're not over it. We're really, really scared. I've had a lot of people that give me very convoluted questions about, I want to try trance work and I want to try these herbs and I'm just not sure about it. And what do you recommend for beginners? And I was like, you know what? You don't need anyone's permission to get high. If you just want to get high, whether it's to get high or it's for aphrodisiac purposes or ritual purposes, it's okay. Go get high. Go experience the drugs. Like, don't care. It doesn't matter if people judge you. Don't tell them.
Yeah.
People try to justify the quote-unquote drug use as, well, I'm doing something spiritual and therefore it's okay. Yeah. Oh, honey, just go smoke a bowl. I
still have, in my old pagan community, people that would hated me and boycotted me completely because I was okay with entheogens. But there's still that mindset in the pagan community where it's like, ooh, no, you can't do that. And if anyone does it, I'm not associating with them. They're bad people.
Yeah. Or they're certain that you're going to poison somebody and die.
Or you're going to roofie them or something dumb like that.
Yeah, that, and when you look around at what quote unquote modern medicine does to people, everyone is literally addicted to extremely addictive molecules that kill hundreds of thousands of people a year. And you go, what's the henbane kill count this year? Is it zero still? Is it still zero?
Zero reported fatalities, no known toxic kills. Again, though, still will hurt you. But
coffee is more likely to harm you.
Yeah.
Cigarettes. Tobacco has killed more people than a lot of the drugs that witches are using and have used.
I think for me, when putting the course together, and it's this blend between recreation and the kind of Protestant work ethic approach, I think it's colored how we look at the presence of these allies historically as well, because there is evidence for the recreational use, but it's recreational use in a world where things like dreams have a different meaning, and things like intuition have a different meaning. So this woman who this churchman wrote very poorly of, who got in the bath and had an infused wine and went blotchy, She probably had some fairly impressive dreams that night. And we're kind of looking back, hoping it is, and I think it's a core shamanism effect. I think there's a dual error in trying to understand the history of our relationship with these allies. The first is to assume that there is some kind of, which barely exists anywhere, frankly, some sort of continuous shamanic. We use this to journey all the way back to the ancient world thing, which there doesn't seem to be evidence for. But by the same token, that doesn't mean there's like no evidence of interaction. There's continuous evidence of interaction, and that's the bit that I found interesting looking at and attempting to share in the course, which is there are multiple kind of modern cognitive errors, if you want, or just worldview errors from the 21st century, looking backwards and seeing how we interacted with these things. And I want to know what the solve is for that. My guess would be it's experiential. My guess would be people should open up relationships today with these things.
Experiential, and it's definitely mindset. Like our culture today very much believes that this reality is reality, that our waking world is the only level of consciousness. Even though science is telling us there are many different levels of consciousness, in our everyday life, we very much believe today that this is it. And then there's either death or this. Life or death, that's it. There's two states, but there isn't. There's, you when you're high, you when you're drunk. There's you when you're sleeping. You when you're in that half awake space when your kids have woken you up, but you can't really wake up. And
you in a really good orgasm.
You had a really good orgasm and you're flashing colors and seeing visions. That's totally happened. Yeah. But there's a million different little levels of reality and experience. And I think until each individual person actually experiences them and recognizes them as valid and existing, we're going to have trouble having dialogues with one another about the validity of trance experiences. I think the more people actually do it and experience it, the more we'll be able to talk to one another and actually treat it like it's real. Right now, you try to tell anyone a story, even, fellow pagans, about something that you've seen with the spirit world or a deity. I've had people be like, have you thought about seeing a therapist?
Maybe? Yeah.
Maybe.
You have to, what are you people doing here, honestly?
A lot of people don't want to believe. I think a lot of people are more concerned with authenticity
than reality.
Than reality. They want to appear authentic. They want that unbroken chain as some sort of proof that it's real exist. And it's okay to do this thing.
It doesn't exist. There is no one true religion. If there is, it's animism.
Obviously.
And it's not a religion, and it's not a spiritual lineage tradition.
Yeah, the only thing that is
one true way.
The only thing that is uninterrupted going back 2 million years is the fact that every human being has consumed plants for food, for whatever. That actual common surface between us and the plant world, even if it's just for nutrition, is the universal. There's no, and that is interesting because it genuinely, all this stuff is actually there to look at and be inspired by in the historical record, which I'm obviously pro. I like that stuff. But the error is one of modern thinking. Looking back at it. That's the bit that I want people to, and I keep coming back to the experiential thing. So I want people to kind of have modern day experiences with some of these allies, and Mugwort, etc., is a good one to start with. And I'll ask you what you would say the next level up is once people are fine with Mugwort. Would you
Mugwort,
say
wormwood? Again, mushrooms are very safe.
That would have been my next level up. Yeah, rather than Mandrake. Mandrake's fine. But,
no.
Yeah.
If you're doing mushrooms, then psilocybin is your first level,
mm-hmm.
and Amanita muscaria would be your next level,
or even just optional.
It's just gonna hurt your guts and your head a little bit more than the psilocybin. Really, you might be a little queasy the next day, and yeah, like you had way too much beer kind of feeling.
And if you make it with some dandelion root and stuff like that, it can help mitigate it a little bit if you're careful about what you eat beforehand.
Everyone's scared of Amanita, but really it's going to make you feel like you're very drunk.
Yeah.
Before, people invented alcohol, they did mushrooms.
Yeah.
Don't be scared of the mushrooms. Again, research first. Get your proper dosages, and dosage is often based on body weight. Best preparation method is tea. In my opinion.
I agree.
So if you're gonna go the mushroom route, use tea. If you're gonna go the herbal route, you can use a tea. You can smoke it. You can make an ointment. What else could you do? Some incenses are psychoactive. So if you're a little bit afraid to actually ingest something or rub it on your body, you could do a psychoactive incense. I used to make some with belladonna or henbane seed in it. And even if you burned it outdoors, you would still get a little something up in your nose, and it would definitely be enough that you could interact with the spirits if you're outside in nature. You could talk to trees and talk to the wind, etc. The nightshades, I think, are like a higher level up, mostly because people are often not smart enough to only use them externally. We often go right to that. I'm going to put it in my mouth.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Don't do that unless you know what you're doing. Like, I know what I'm doing, so I would feel comfortable having like a Mandrake or henbane wine or beer, etc., or even a tincture. But I'm still, even at my level, I'm not comfortable with belladonna being ingested in any way. I know some people are like, yeah, belladonna tincture is the best. I'm like, that's nice for you.
Yeah.
I'm worried about blindness possibly in the future for that person, or some permanent damage. I don't know. But so those are, research first before you try different preparations for nightshades. Stick with the external use. Other plants that I really enjoy that are safe and legal, California poppy. Wild lettuce is a really good one. You can use the leaf or the actual resin. That's it's like opium but without the opiates.
And how is that one? How do we do that?
So you can dry the leaf and smoke it.
Mm-hmm.
You can make a tincture and drink it. It's really bitter, so smoking is good. A lot of people will also, you can collect the resin. So you cut the plant and you let the gooey, it's got latex in it. So you collect the latex, you cut it again, let it bleed and collect the latex. And then you dehydrate the latex until it turns black and you get this little gooey ball of dried black latex. And then you would smoke that like hash. Not that I know how to do that. So that's that. But you only need a little tiny bit, like a little teeny tiny pinhead to start kind of thing. Like, don't go crazy if you're doing the latex. The leaf, you can have like a bowl or a roll of cigarette and you're fine. I like blending wormwood and wild lettuce because wormwood can keep you very awake and energized, whereas the wild lettuce will give you more of that half asleep kind of effect, but the wormwood will give you a better high. So if you give them a combination, it's rather pleasant. What are some other good legal ones?
Bog myrtle.
Does that one give you? Is that psychoactive?
Very, very mildly.
Very.
It's really excellent, especially for dreaming and things like that. So it was one of the herbs of the years for WS. And it's one of those ones that's really safe. You can have a lot of it. It's great for like soak the leaves in some
tastes
beer.
As well.
Tastes really good. So you soak some leaves in some beer.
He's frozen. Just a second.
I can still hear though. The camera will catch up. Yeah.
So your video froze.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to make sure the video.
But yeah, bog myrtle. You soak some leaves in some beer like overnight or for a couple of days, and then you have the bog myrtle with the alcohol, and you have like just an enjoyable evening. And then you lay down and you go to sleep, and you have crazy fucking dreams.
Nice. Nice.
So something like that is really good if you're kind of nervous.
The dream one's a good example. What else is a good kind of either tea before bed for dreaming, or I like the infusions. I've used Blue Lotus in wine, and I had the most amazing dreams. The evening felt like coming up on ecstasy, and the dreams were incredible. So, but is there one? I want to ask, what are some good dreaming herbs that, in addition to the bog myrtle we've just mentioned, and also, yeah.
Oh.
And also, and here's a more challenging one because the blanket answer should be probably nothing. Are there plant allies that can assist with dreaming that are safe during pregnancy?
Yeah. Okay, let me answer the first one. My favorite herbs for dreaming, not necessarily all psychoactive, only one of them is. Mugwort would be the psychoactive component. And then I like to blend with mullein, lavender, and some spearmint or mint. I really like that blend. I do an elixir with it. Works beautifully. It also works in an ointment, especially if you add a little belladonna in there. Mugwort isn't as awesome in an ointment, but it'll still work, especially if you're lightweight. But those are my favorites for dreaming, and they can taste very pleasant if you mix them all together, because the mint and the lavender make the mugwort taste less bitter and nasty. And what I wouldn't combine with those would be wild lettuce. Wild lettuce is really good for dreaming. So I would smoke that or do a tincture. It doesn't work as an ointment. So smoke it or do a tincture before bed, and you should get some interesting dreams as well as a better sleep. And then for pregnancy, maybe just lavender flower.
I was thinking that. You listed some stuff. You go, you might be all right with spearmint.
With the spearmint and lavender. They're supposed to help with psychic powers, especially mint. So, yeah. I'll let Juniper.
I think you got it covered, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't really have anything fun while you're pregnant. You could probably get away with some California poppy because it's safe for children. I've tried researching, and there's no known, it's not known whether it's toxic or not. There's no known toxicity. It's so gentle.
Yeah.
So you could probably get away with California poppy as a tea, a tincture. I wouldn't smoke it maybe if you're pregnant, but meh.
No, cool. All right, so that's good. We've got a kind of gradation of plant allies that people can either do on their own, or we've kind of talked through them, and we also have some best practice for doing, a group entheogenic experience. So the next two are for people who, and you don't necessarily have to grow, well, you can't, but like you can't grow the ayahuasca vine in your house, but there's something to be said for interacting with, the living examples of these allies. How might someone do that if they lived in, an apartment in Singapore or something? So I'll get what's a good thing to grow for people who are interested in this world? And also, what are some favorite kind of science-y books for herbalism or even foraging or that kind of stuff rather than witchy ones? So those are the two kind of, let's bring it into... let's bring it into the physical.
My main recommendation is just make sure you know how big the plant gets before you grow it indoors. Don't be trying to grow mugwort in your living room. It gets really, really tall and gigantic, and then it dies. So it's not a good houseplant because it doesn't come back every year. But other really good indoor plants are surprisingly Datura and Brugmansia. Mm-hmm. Not if you have children or pets that are going to eat the plants. But if you have a living situation where you're not worried about that, then I've had a good success with Datura and Brugmansia as indoor houseplants. Just keep in mind that Brugmansia is a tree. Some people think it's Datura. It's not. It's a tree. Be prepared to get a very large pot and a dedicated space for it. And treat it like a poinsettia in the winter. Hack it down and put it in a dark place.
Cool.
And then other indoor plants, again, just research how big it gets, whether it's a perennial or an annual. Obviously, you want an annual that's going to come back every year as a houseplant.
I didn't think you could grow Datura inside.
A patio or a balcony, then you can grow whatever you want in a container. I used to just drill holes in big plastic totes and fill them with dirt and compost. Put them up on a pallet or a couple pieces of wood. You can grow anything.
So what's the weirdest thing you've grown on a balcony then?
Everything. I had trees. I had all the nightshades. I had sweet potatoes. Seriously, you can grow anything.
Nice.
Yeah, in a container garden. You just have to water it all the time, every day in the summer. It's the only downside. What would you recommend growing? Is there a plant that you can just nibble? I don't know.
I hate growing shit.
She's I'm gonna go pick something that already exists in the wild, and I'm like, how can I grow this?
Yeah. No, I hate gardening to a point. I'm like, I'll plant some daisies and grow some poppies in them, and I have a chunk of my yard where the Datura and the foxglove are starting to take over. But I don't like cultivating. I don't like tending something. If I can, I'll let it grow in a corner of my property, or I'll learn where I could find it in the woods, or make friends with someone like Sarah who has a botanica.
Yeah.
I'm not a cultivator. I don't want to mother the things.
No.
Okay. My advice, if you're like Juniper and you don't want to baby a plant and worry about being responsible for keeping it alive, then maybe go with bioregionalism, where you're getting field guides for your local area and you're researching local plants. And then you can go meet the plants where they already exist and you don't have to worry about killing them because they're in their natural environment.
Well, that leads into the book side of things. So what kind of plant, like science-y rather than magic-y, plant or bioregional books would you recommend for people who are interested? Something like, I actually recommended this the other day, but like Five Kingdoms by Lynn Margulies. Like, are there books that are kind of rigorous enough to give you a gestalt to kind of work in this world?
Oh, yeah. One of my favorite books when I was living in British Columbia was just a field guide.
Yeah, they're the best.
And it was full of magic as well. It had like the native magical uses for the plants on top of all the scientific and medicinal and edible uses. So if you can find just the perfect field guide, go to your library because they legally have to have a selection of local field guides, and then find the best one and then buy that one. Give it back to the library and then buy your own copy once you find the one that's perfect for what you want. Also, if you live in North America, anything on Native American ethnobotany, there's actually like a giant dictionary encyclopedia type book called Native American Ethnobotany. Again, if you're in North America, especially on the West Coast, anything by Nancy J. Turner. She's a very revered ethnobotanist at the University of British Columbia. And again, anything by Wade Davis.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Fucking love him. Love him. I missed his lectures on the nightshades at UBC because I had a baby. I was so bummed. By him is amazing because he'll cover anything from the middle of a rainforest in South America to your own backyard. So he's a really good wide-ranging one. He has an assortment of books you can choose from. Other sciencey things, I love Christian Rasch, German fellow, Germanish. His works have been translated. Some of them have. He's got his Encyclopedia of Psychoactive Plants and his Encyclopedia of Aphrodisiac Plants. If you are hardcore and you really want to know dosages, history, lore, ritual uses, etc., he's a really good resource. His books are expensive, but it's because they're gigantic academic hardcovers. So don't whine about the money, just buy them and then thank me later. Sciencey. Who else is sciencey? I have a really good book. I think it's published by Oxford Press, University of Oxford. I might be wrong. What is it called? Uses and Abuses of Plant-Derived Smoke. It's all about the the entheogenic and traditional uses of anything that's burned or inhaled. And it's just a straight-up encyclopedia.
Cool.
That one's a really good one.
Yeah, I'm going to find that.
In that one. It's not very...
Yeah, I haven't heard of that. That's going on the wish list. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get incense recipes out of that one. Another one that's surprisingly scientific is Richard Allen Miller. He has two books. One's called The Magical and Ritual Uses of Herbs, and the other one is called The Ritual and Magical Uses of Aphrodisiacs. They're both very small books, and they have shitty, like, Llewellyn-esque kind of covers. But don't let that deter you. The contents are really good. He's one of the only pagan, air quotes, authors that includes the chemical constituents and the effects on the human body, along with the ritual uses, etc. And then he's got some nice appendixes that are like worth their weight in gold as well. So those two little tiny paperbacks, Richard Allen Miller, surprisingly sciencey.
Brilliant. Well, This has been really fun. This has been a good accidental double talk. So thank you both for, chatting with me this afternoon / early this morning in Australia. And for people who want to know more about your good selves, where do they go?
You can find me at walkingthehedge.net. Please forgive me, the website is full of spam. I haven't updated it in like 3 years. Or at witchessabbat.ca, which is the event, the Witches Sabbat at Ravensknoll, held at the end of May.
Nice one.
Which is very awesome, and anyone who can get there should definitely go.
And it's held on pagan land.
It is.
Nice.
So it can be relatively witchy without, getting in trouble. You can find me on the web at sarahannlawless.com, and that's Anne with an E and Sarah with an H. And you can also find my apothecary at fernandfungi.com if you're looking for some of these herbs. to use.
Nice one. Well, this and, the various social homes and so on will be linked up in the show notes. So, ladies, thank you very much. I got quite a bit out of this, including a book recommendation that I'm literally just going to go and look for now. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks for having us.
There we go then. Lots of extra context for the RuneSoup Premium members going through the journeying course, and some great practical advice for us all on working with plant allies in a journeying context. Let me know what you think at the RuneSoup Facebook page or at runesoup.com. Subscribe to the show on iTunes or in your favourite podcatcher, and find me on Twitter where I am Gordon, Gordon_White, WHITE. Until next time.